Brandon Brown, CEO of the Mind Trust. Thank you so much for joining us here for a CharterFolk chat.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Jed. Really appreciate it.
I've been excited about this one for a while and very thankful that you agreed to do this. I think this is an important conversation. It's also a little bit of a delicate one, and I hope that we can demonstrate some tone rightness here, because we could talk about some of these topics here and just get it wrong. But I feel like trying to run at some issues right now with as much candor as we can is probably helpful. And there's nobody I entrust, in the country, frankly, more than you to help us on these sensitive topics, speak with candor and show a great deal of courage in the work that you're doing. So again, thank you, and look forward to diving in here.
Really looking forward to it. This should be a lively and super transparent conversation.
All right. Almost everybody here that's going to be watching our stuff or listening to our stuff is going to know who you are, but there may be a few. And in fact, there have been some conversations I've had just the last few days. That person's who's reading? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. There may be 2 or 3 people in Charterland or in Ed Reform land that don't know Brandon Brown, or there are probably some that don't really know your background and how exactly step by step you found yourself in this place of immense responsibility and influence. Can you walk people through what your experience has been here in charter schools and Ed Reform?
Yeah. So I am originally from the south side of Indianapolis, and grew up in a large family. So I was the oldest of 5 kids. So I have 4 younger siblings. Went to college at WashU, and I know that you are there quite often, Jed, which is amazing.
Go Bears, go Bears. That's right.
Go Bears. Great experience. I was a track and cross country athlete, and really learned how to build community through that experience. And it kind of scratched the competitive itch as well. I, like many of us, I joined TFA out of college, taught 9th and 10th grade English on the south side of St. Louis. And like many TFA alums, met my wife when I was in the Corps. So she was a middle school math teacher a few miles north of me. We started dating at the beginning of the school year. I'm very impatient. When I kind of make a conclusion on something, I like to move. So we got engaged 3 months later. And we got married between year 1 and year 2 of the Corps.
Oh my gosh.
It was certainly a whirlwind.
Listen, I'm married to a TFA Corps member, right? So first of all, you showed great judgment, but you moved faster than we did. That's amazing.
So we, we're kind of thinking about what was next after our Corps commitment. And I had the opportunity to join TFA staff here in Indy. So it was very exciting to get home. I genuinely thought and, had conversations with my wife about how, we'll probably do this for 2 or 3 years and then we'll figure out something else. And here we are over 15 years later, still committed to this city and the work of providing all kids with a great education. So after my time on TFA staff, joined the mayor's office as the charter schools director. So the unique thing about Indianapolis is that the mayor is the major authorizer. So, really had the opportunity to see firsthand what high quality authorizing looks like in the intersection between high quality schools and politics, and learned a lot from the mayor. He was a 20-year retired Marine who had a no nonsense way of leading. He would hire people, he would give them clear expectations, and then he would get out of their way. And it was kind of a trial by fire, and learned a ton. When he chose not to run for re-election, I was really thinking about what's next, and had the opportunity to join the Mind Trust just over 10 years ago now, and then have been the CEO for just about 7.5 years. And we are celebrating our 20th anniversary.
Amazing.
And are, super excited about the impact that we've collectively made here in Indy, and are thinking about how do we, get towards this North Star of a system of autonomous, highly accountable schools that are as high quality as possible and are responsive to our community, and really excited to work towards that vision here the next few years.
Love that, using the term North Star. That's fantastic. Whatever. We won't skip to that. We'll hold that for a little while here. But look, a part of the framing for this is around courage and advocacy. And, I look, you've heard me say it to you directly, and you've probably heard bank shots, just the courageousness that you have shown in recent years, I just think is incredible. And that's why I wanted to talk with you. I also want to be tone right on courage generally within our space, because there are many people that are already demonstrating high levels of courage. I think courage is something that's been a hallmark of the charter school movement going back 30 years now. And I also don't want to suggest that the responsibilities for courageousness fall unproportionately on the shoulders of the CEOs of advocacy organizations, or even within advocacy organizations at all. School leaders are showing courageousness over and over again. Parents are, other employees are, funders are too, when they get called out from time to time. So at the same time, I do believe that we're probably in a moment when a chapter of even additional courageousness is necessary, but I wanted to start with that framing that, hey, courage is something we need to be thinking about, but we don't do so from a perspective of deficit. Any just general reactions on the framing here? Because I'd love to go from there, but I think it also would be good to hear your observations on that.
Yeah, no, I totally think that's the right frame. I was actually thinking, as I was trying to prep for this conversation about, if you think about the 3 decades plus of charter schooling across the country, just the multitude of courageous examples of true leadership, right? So from the early years, and all the school founders who had to scrap and claw to even get those schools launched, to we're now 20 years into the reforms in New Orleans, which not only transformed that community through courageous leadership, right, but have really inspired cities across the country to really emulate that courage. So I couldn't agree more with you that there are examples of courage all across our sector. And I also agree that the time that we're in right now demands even more of it. So, kind of whatever we can do in Indy to, share the lessons, the wins, the challenges, to kind of light a fire with, more courageous leaders out there. I get really excited to think about that impact.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So then also some other more framing and some context. Can you talk to us about what the progress that was made in this last year? There have been articles and there have been comments in a variety of different contexts saying that what happened in Indiana last year may be the strongest legislative session we've ever seen any single state have. There are people that will argue that left and right. Let's just say that it's certainly among the most important sessions that we've had in terms of just sheer volume of breakthrough. So would you mind just sharing with listeners who may not be acquainted with all the detail, or at least the resonant detail, the salient detail, what was the amount of progress that was made last year?
Yeah, so it's what I've started calling the kitchen sink session. I mean, there was a lot going on. So, to kind of just quickly sum it up, I think that the biggest accomplishment was getting to the finish line around sharing local property taxes with charter school students. There is a $7,900 per student funding disparity between charter students in Indy and their school district peers. It's unacceptable. It's just absolutely unacceptable. And there's been, I would say, incremental progress now for a few years, primarily in 2023, where new referendums need to be shared, and then incremental increases in local levies also had to be shared. So 2023 meant that gap's not going to widen anymore. 2025 meant we have to get rid of the gap. So to achieve, full local property tax sharing in 2025 was something that a lot of advocates, not just me, a lot of advocates have been working for years on. Secondly, which is something that's a little bit more wonky, but I'm actually equally as excited about, and something that the Mind Trust has been, trying to pursue now for about 15 years, the ability for schools within a community to come together to create an independent facility and transportation authority.
Yeah.
So now that local resources will start to flow to, more kids, we have to think about, okay, so how can we expand access? How can we rethink managing facilities and transportation, and separating the management of transportation and facilities from the education of kids? And I'm excited. This got some news last week. I'm excited that 54 charter schools in Indy all came together to submit an application to the state to create this new infrastructure.
That's great. Amazing.
We're optimistic that that's going to be approved to move forward a multi-year design process, to really figure out what does infrastructure look like to manage those two operational components. And then hopefully that new entity would actually have the ability to levy property taxes as well. Third, in the same bill, there was the creation of what is called the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance. So this is a 9-member advisory group, the majority of whom are appointed by the mayor of Indianapolis, who you'll remember is also the major authorizer.
Yeah.
And the task of this group is to come up with a series of legislative recommendations by December that would reimagine the structure of our school district. So, rethinking transportation and facilities, but also rethinking school district governance, rethinking school autonomy. So, we'll kind of see where this goes the next few months. And I don't have a crystal ball, but the North Star of a system of autonomous schools, led by nonprofit boards who have a performance contract with an authorizer, in the moral imperative to scale that up to as many kids as possible. You can imagine how that, how a piece of that vision, right, could see its way into these recommendations. So really excited that the community has a chance for local civic leaders to come together to chart the course. And then hopefully our legislature will be responsive to that. Last, which kind of flew under the radar because there was so much going on, but actually has had the most impact already, is a simple 2-sentence zoning reform that pretty much says a school of all types is approved in all zoning districts, which means that once a charter school gets its charter, it's a golden ticket. Yep. Zoning is no longer an issue, and zoning can no longer be a weapon used to prevent the opening of a new school. That law in and of itself, with charter schools and private schools, has already paved the way for 8 to 10 schools to open.
Unbelievable.
Of course, the past 2 months. So we were starting to see zoning used as a weapon. And there was one case in particular in our city that was egregious, and that motivated some legislators to, really think about that policy change. And it kind of flew under the radar during session, but it's already paying huge dividends.
Yeah, I remember when you first told me about that, it was in a total, oh, by the way, that zoning thing. And I believe you had connected with Utah and you'd lifted the language from Utah. So now we have 2 states that have it. But there has been states that have been working on that issue as the number one issue forever. And you have made that, and it's the 4th thing that you mentioned, in the progress that was made last year. So just incredible. Congratulations. It was, in fact, a great session. I'd love for you to talk a little bit, if you could give us a backstage pass about how this happened. CharterFolk readers may remember that about this time last year, I went out to Indiana, spent some significant time there, did a whole Indianapolis series of posts and all that stuff. You took me out for this shrimp dinner that I'll never, forget. And you let me flap my gums for a very long time because you were talking about, hey, we're going to do something big next year. And then I've told everybody everything that I shared with Brandon. He completely and utterly, he took the general spirit of it and then forgot every specific and then came up with something smarter. So walk us through, give us the backstage pass. How did something like this actually get done?
So I actually think our dinner over shrimp cocktail was the night of the vice presidential debate, because I remember it being on, and we were kind of watching that, but we were more interested in our conversation about charter schools.
That's right.
Yeah. So, kind of mentioned this earlier, but this session was really a culmination of about 6 years of intentional coalition work. So, the core of that coalition was the Mind Trust and the Institute for Quality Education, which is our statewide school choice political powerhouse, and a newly constituted state charter school association. So that was kind of the 3-legged stool of the core of the coalition. And then we also had members of the coalition that span the geography of Indiana. So we have a wealthy, very influential school founder on the northern end of our state who was in the coalition. And then we had a wealthy, very influential school founder in the South who was also in our coalition. So knowing that most charters in Indiana are located in Indy, it's very important for us to get geographic representation so that we had, real influence with legislators that were kind of, outside the metro area.
Yeah.
So this coalition met once every 2 weeks as a group religiously for 6 years. And we're still meeting because there's still a lot of work to be done. And we had subcommittees. We would yell at each other. We would argue. We would, have to call after a Zoom to apologize, right? But it was just a big, gnarly family, right? That all had this shared value, but maybe came at it in a variety of ways. And through all of those conversations, we really gelled, and I think hit our stride coming into the 2025 session. So one of my reflections is, yes, like maybe it took some courage from me and the Mind Trust, but it took a lot of courage from a lot of people over the course of time to actually build, the political constituency to see the wins that we saw. And I would also say, like, you can be the best advocate in the world, but the legislators are actually the ones who write the bills, right? They have their name on the bills, they're driving and they're taking the heat. So we just are also blessed with a group of amazing state house leaders who have been charter school champions for a long time and who were incredible partners this session, who, really ended up driving this thing and leading the charge. And it was an honor for us to be able to, help to surface some ideas and then, really provide them support along the way.
I want to go in on some of the personal parts of your story here over the last year. Before, can we tie it to some writing that you've done here at CharterFolk? It's interesting. You won the Brian's Voice Award for your post-election. Hey, what should reformers be taking from the November election, which was nominated and ended up being one of the 3 choices. I will say there is a little bit of editorial separation here at CharterFolk. I didn't choose. I didn't know what was going on. They just did it. And I was like, okay, that's great. I liked that post too. But actually, if you'd asked me what would have been my favorite Brandon Brown post of the last year, it was the second one you wrote last year, which was about the need for charter school advocates to not be agnostic about school type. And so what I wonder is, can you tie that writing to what happened here? We've also got this question about how does the charter school world get on offense? We hear it over and over and over again. And I tend to think there's a real connection between ending our agnosticism and getting on offense. Can you just talk about those topics generally?
Yeah, so this is a topic where I've just shifted, quite frankly, the last 2 or 3 years. I am not kidding. This is a real story. So my kids searched for my name on YouTube the other day, and they pulled up a 2013 video. I looked a lot younger, of me speaking at a local community association meeting when I was at the mayor's office. And I literally used the term school choice agnostic, or no, sorry, literally used the term school type agnostic, and spent a lot of time, just to be really frank, apologizing for the controversy around charter schools, and really talking about how schools of all types can be successful, and no one type is more successful than the others, because it was beat into me, Jed, that's how you talk about this work.
Yep.
And I have used those phrases, hundreds of times during my career. And I got to the point a couple of years ago where I said, you know what? Like, I've actually devoted my career to this. I've read the research. I have, seen this firsthand. And I actually have a view that there is a better way to do public schooling than how we have historically done it. And charter schooling is not perfect.
Yeah.
But the conditions that charter schools bring to the table are conditions that in my community have led to significantly better academic performance. Every external study, every analysis has led to the same conclusion. So, I just, kind of said, look, if I'm a charter school advocate and if this is all the data, then I'm actually not school type agnostic. And that does not
Yeah.
mean that I hate traditional public schools. That does not mean that there are not great traditional public schools. There are.
Yep.
But on the whole, we have a form of public schooling that unequivocally works in our community. And why would I hide that fact?
Yeah.
And I started thinking, right, if you are a pro-choice or a pro-life advocate, are you agnostic on abortion? If you're an advocate that attacks homelessness, are you agnostic on homelessness? Right? You could go down the line. Of course not. Right? If you're an advocate, you affirmatively advocate for the thing that you deeply believe will improve lives. And, I think that same thing applies to the work of a charter school advocate. We need to affirmatively advocate for the conditions within charter schools being applied to more kids. And if we're unable or unwilling to do that, then we should ask ourselves why.
Yep.
And if we're not able to get to the point where we think that is a moral imperative, then we're either doing charter schooling wrong in a given community and, not actually seeing those results,
Yep.
or maybe we don't have the fire in the belly to actually advocate forcefully enough for more kids to be able to get those conditions. So this is something that I've evolved on over time. And, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer, but this is how I view it. And to your point, it directly relates to the legislative wins. The
Yep.
conviction that it took to even propose those ideas in the first place.
Yep.
And then the conviction that it took to see it through the 4 months of the session would not have been there if I was school type agnostic. It just wouldn't have, Jed. I
Yep.
probably would have implicitly done this, but I would have slowed down.
Yep.
And I would have pumped the brakes.
Yep.
But I'm not agnostic on school type. I believe that this is a moral imperative to scale up this model to serve more public school kids.
Yep.
For that reason, right, come hell or high water, we were going to see it through.
Yep. Well, I've shared with you separately how during my 7th year at CCSA, I was driving into Oakland for a community meeting, and I knew there were going to be 300 or 400 people there, and I was going to be the one charter guy. And as it turned out, there were charter folk in the audience, but they were there in such small numbers relative to the status quo protectors that none of them really wanted to stand up, nor did I expect them to stand up. I knew I was essentially going into this on my own. And I kind of liked that. I didn't, whatever. There are people, I didn't consider it a burden. I considered it a part of the job. The burden for me driving in my minivan that I'm still driving to this darn day was I'm just not as crisp in these settings as I want to be. What am I thinking? And I really, on that drive, that 80-mile drive, I grounded on this idea, what we are really seeking is greatly more public education. And the reason that we like charter schools is because we are examples of what greatly more public education is. And we're developing the heft to push the public school system to become greatly more public too. Yes, to become higher performing, as you're talking about, but also to purge itself of its unfairnesses. And we as charter school people have no reason to be sheepish in the least about the fact that we want those things to be erased. While we do not ever present ourselves as having it all figured out, or hey, charter school people are just genetically better than others. So there are people in all these situations that are heroes as well. We're trying to push this overall system to allow them to become even more successfyou. Okay. So, and yet what we have to put up with, to simply assert that. So would you mind just sharing a little bit what your personal experience was like last year? I mean, look, you look great right now. I got to say, you look great. You look like you did a year ago. I did see you about halfway through this. I thought you'd lost a lot of weight. I thought you looked like you lost a lot of sleep. I guess I can't see your step, so I can't see the spring, but I can almost, I can sense the spring in your step just by your posture right now. Talk a little bit about what the experience was like, and what's it really require to courageously unapologetically be unagnostic in support of charter school progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's really important is, again, there was a coalition of folks in our city and across the state who worked hard on this, and that courage and the sacrifice was, shared among a lot of people. And I have a colleague in particular who, is a leader in the Black community in our city who, took heat from certain corners of our community that she will never go into detail with because it was so bad. So, you know, one, I just want to acknowledge that there were, a lot of people who worked, really hard to see this through. And for whatever reason, I kind of ended up being the face, and the kind of, maybe public center of a lot of the attacks. So I think that your observations were right. I didn't sleep a lot during the legislative session. I realized that I became irritable with my family, more than I would have liked. I broke out significantly, kind of all over my face the last 2 months of session. And it wore me down, and it showed in multiple ways. I was thinking last night, just a sampling of the names that I was called, and this is a very small sample, right? So apparently, I was an architect of Project 2025. Obviously, I was a racist. I was a complete piece of shit. I was a fascist. The amount of memes that were, floating on social media, that are just even hard to describe. They were so bizarre, and I think over time, right? So you can't shield your kids from all of that. So they would, see some of it, they would hear some of it. That meant we had to have hard conversations in the evenings, about what it is that I do at work. And, and then there were several moments in time that really stand out at me. So, one was the first school board meeting after one of the bills that we actually didn't push, but kind of was made public literally on New Year's Eve while I was driving to a Pacers game. And it was the bill that got the most national coverage the first month of the session that would have dissolved IPS and made all the schools charter schools. That was not driven by the Mind Trust. That was not something that we necessarily supported publicly, but that was the first bill that dropped a week before the session. And it got a lot of attention. And it really was the speaker and the legislative leadership's attempt to create urgency on the conversation around sharing local property tax dollars. But that kind of set the stage, right, for 4 months of vitriol. And like during the game, I was in the stands. It already started on social media, and just didn't relent for about 4 months. Well, the next week, it was the first school board meeting of the year for our district. And one of our team members ran into one of the new school board members at IPS at a community event. And this was somebody that I had supported for school board. I had known for a long time. I considered her a friend. And she looked at our staff member and said, "I'm going to say some really horrible things about your boss tonight." And that was my cue not to attend or watch a school board meeting for the entire 4 months. Now, I would hear what was said afterwards. I would, get maybe some clips sent to me. One of the speakers in that meeting had a giant picture of my face, and she ripped it up for the camera, and she said, "He is the real enemy." That was actually one that my team didn't even tell me about until months later. So that was kind of the kind of tone and tenor. And then if you fast forward about 2.5 months, it was a Saturday morning. I was taking my kids to the gym to play basketball. And I was notified of a serious threat on my life on Facebook that was accompanied with my home address. And that was the first time where, like the social media threats didn't seem real to me until that one, and it
Yeah.
just it just really hit home. So I had a long conversation that day with my wife, and we were able to talk with our board, and had to get security at our house. And we started, monitoring social media threats, and so that was kind of the last couple of months of the session. And then the last kind of thing that really sticks out to me is it was the day of the floor vote in the Senate for the property tax sharing bill, and I came to the State House, and just got accosted by a mob of union folks, who just said the most vile things, and they, just like had a camera in my face. They were,
Mm.
streaming it live on social media. We're just saying crazy things. And for the first time, I felt like I was a distraction at State House, and I just made the decision to leave that day. And then a few weeks later, I was driving in for the committee hearing on the facilities and transportation bill, and I got a call from our VP of policy while I was on my way to the State House, and she said, "Hey, boss, probably shouldn't come in today, because you're going to get swarmed, and it's going to be a distraction." And that was the one time where I think I almost started crying in the car, and I was like, "Man, I can't even show my face at the State House." And I literally turned around and I went back to the office. And then from there on, only went to the State House when I had a private meeting with a legislator that was not going to be in public, right? So, just kind of three specific examples of a series of real challenges over 4 months that you knew this was going to be hard, but you didn't really know the extent of it until you actually experienced it.
So much so that your board said to you this summer, wouldn't it be good if you could get some time to charge your batteries? Am I accurate in that?
Yes, and thank God.
Mhm.
And that's another thing too. Like, our board was so good during all of this. They,
Mm.
knew the plan. They agreed with the plan, and they were steadfast. That we were not going to back down. And then
Yep.
whatever me and the team needed to feel supported along the way, they were just tremendous. And I think that's one of my reflections too. Like, you know, this couldn't have happened without the leadership of our board, without the leadership of civic leaders in the community who might not have been out front, but certainly had our back. And certainly we're not going to get weak kneed,
Yeah.
just because left-wing socialists like made this their recruitment issue this year, right? So it was really good to hear every once in a while from big time leaders in our community, who might not have been public on this issue, but we're sending, notes of encouragement. We're, randomly making a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon just to ask how you were doing.
Yep.
And that kind of leadership in our community was quiet and, not seen broadly, but it was extremely impactful for me.
And really, at the heart of it, you get called all these things. You endure this treatment because you had the temerity to suggest that charter school students should be funded at the same level as other public school students. Isn't that the crux of it? And essentially, being willing to just say that unapologetically is what resulted in this kind of treatment coming your way. Am I
That's
right?
right. That's right. At the core of it, that's what we were advocating for. The reality is that within IPS's geography, 68% of Black students, 65% of low-income students, 60% of Latino students attend charter schools. And they're being discriminated against to the tune of $8,000 a kid. All we were asking for is for those kids to be treated fairly, and we were willing for it to be phased in over time. We were willing to make accommodations to ensure that the existing incumbent system, had the ability to transform itself as well. But at its core, what we were advocating for is let's treat all kids fairly. And in this case, the students that we were advocating for were historically marginalized kids. So yes, it is ironic that those were the accusations when you think about what it was that we were actually advocating for.
One of the most bewildering discussions I had to have again and again was with our own base, with our own funders, maybe some advocacy partners that would just suggest that we were to us them. Can't you find a way to get this done without becoming as us them as you're reported to be right now? And boy, that was challenging. And I know that you had your moments too, perhaps in Indianapolis, I think across the entire country, where what I would describe as charter folk, people from our own world, our own reform world, saying, Brandon, what are you doing? You're making things worse. There's a toxic narrative that is coming out of this that really was all but a verbatim repeat of the us them conversations I had. Am I right that, in fact, many in our own world saw what you were doing in those terms?
Yeah, so we got, a lot of feedback, in particular the first month when it became, clear what the agenda was. And, I would say that it was mixed. It got a lot of notes of encouragement. A lot of folks were, super excited about what we were doing. And then I would say, generally third hand, Jed, I would hear that, not everybody agreed. And you know what? At the end of the day, that's fine. And, I think that we actually listened to multiple voices, and tried to use that to refine what we were doing. One thing that was instilled in me when I joined the Mind Trust, and one thing that I've tried to carry with me in this role, is we value our funders and we see them as partners in this work. And we're going to go them with, challenges, what's going well and what's not going well. There's never going to be a surprise. So, all of our major funders, knew our strategy well in advance, and had the opportunity to weigh in. But it's also really important to be in the Mind Trust that we're going to pursue our theory of change in the way that we in our community believe it should be pursued. And we're going to take feedback from all comers, but we're not going to prioritize a funder's feedback over somebody else. And we're not going to change what we're doing solely based on what we're hearing from funders. And I think, if you end up developing a track record of being honest and upfront, following through on what you say you're going to do, you don't have to win every time. But, as long as that translates into, wins over time, then ultimately, I think that puts you in a stronger position with funders. Versus you kind of blowing with the wind, depending on who you talk to last. And, many of the critics who thought we were being too brash and, a little bit too far out there, were also very quick to celebrate the wins, right? To let us know, how amazing the progress was, and how they're with us, right? So, ultimately, I think it takes a level of confidence that, everybody's not going to agree with you, and that's fine. You don't need unanimous support, but you got to be convicted in what you're doing, and you got to be grounded in your local context. And look, we're 20 years into this, the Mind Trust. This would not have flown in 2006 when we were founded, right? This was a methodical, intentional, 2-decade-long effort that started well before me. And those conditions ended up creating the opportunity in 2025 to go big, right? So it would have been foolish for us to do, any of the scope of what happened this year until the conditions were right. So you actually, also have to be opportunistically patient to wait for the window. But once the window opens, I've learned you got to sprint, and you got to sprint as hard as you can, because that window is going to close eventually. And you don't want to look back one day and say, damn, I wish we would have sprinted harder while we had that window open.
Yeah. So as we started the discussion, trying to encourage us to step into another level of courageousness, there's courage all over the place. I consider my posse my closest posse, the CEOs of these state associations. And, I just stand in just real awe and respect for what these folks are bringing to this work. And their jobs are impossible, and I love them and all that's okay. And also, I feel like there's another level of courageousness that's needed. And I'm just trying to unpack what it is that might be holding us back from that next chapter. Would you mind if I just posit a few things and then just see which of them most resonate with you?
Yeah.
One of them is a sense that the charter school world is vulnerable right now. We're politically vulnerable right now. And if we do anything that is controversial, by definition, we're going to be sacrificing a few other supporters. And so if you're an advocate and you're out there doing something controversial, by definition, you must be bad at your job. You must be unwise. That's one. A second one, and this gets to be more city specific than state specific, though I can probably point to a few state examples as well. But a lot of our city people, they used to work in school districts. Yeah, they used to have, or some of their closest friends are there still, or they have a theory of change that requires the district to do something in partnership terms as well. And so if the full critique is asserted, well, people feel as though that's going to damage the relationship. It's going to make the district less likely to work with us. I think there are other places where there's just a simple reflexive risk aversion, just risk aversion generally. And also, I don't feel like, especially the boards of our advocacy organizations, it sounds like the Mind Trust board had this conversation in advance. Yes. We knew what was going, and we knew this was going to be risky, but we're consciously willing to take that risk. I feel like some boards just don't really talk about, are we consciously choosing less risk because that's the wise thing to do? Or are we simply avoiding it because we don't want to take on, that level of stress right now? So those are three things I posit. Maybe you can comment on all three of them, or maybe you can comment on the one that most resonates with you. What might be preventing us from taking that next step of courageousness?
Yeah. So I think your point about relationships is really important, and it's resonant. So we actually have a long history of working very closely with our school district here in Indianapolis. About 40% of our charters are actually in close partnership with our district. And the superintendent is a TFA alum. She was a school leader at KIPP. She was the architect of much of the innovation school work. I've been good friends with her now for over 15 years. She onboarded me into my first job at TFA. Deeply love and respect Alicia. And the reality is, we haven't agreed on much the last few years. And right, that's hard. And it's, I feel it in my bones sometimes. And there are a lot of relationships like that at the school district. There are a lot of relationships like that on the school board. There are relationships like that at the legislature. I know many Democrats personally who I have deep respect for, who voted in the Senate to close 70% of charter schools because they were mad about the property tax sharing bill. And so the reality is, when you get into advocacy, those relationships are actually really important. And I think that they can be a strength. I think they can also be to your detriment. And I think as a society, I'm not going to make any grand political announcements here, but we've collectively lost the ability to separate the policy from the person. And we've forgotten that we can vehemently disagree with somebody on a policy and still love and respect them as a person. And, I can't speak for my friends at IPS, but I deeply love and respect a lot of people at IPS. Yeah. Right. And we actually probably agree on a lot of things. Yeah. But the last few years, we haven't agreed on the big things. And, this is just a season that you have to be ready for. And that's hard. It's like one thing to say that, like over a drink, or it's one thing to say it when you're interviewing for these jobs. It's another thing to actually do it when you're in it and live with the consequences of either, harming long-term relationships or potentially losing them forever. And you just have to be okay with that. And it's lonely, right? Yeah. And you feel like the whole world's against you. They're not. You feel like, everybody in your community is out to get you. It's a small number of people. Yeah. Right. And you just have to keep perspective. And then I feel strongly about this, when all is said and done, I'm going to get a drink with Alicia and we're going to have a great conversation. Right. And we're going to look back and say, look, that was rough. That was, that was really hard. But ultimately, because of the give and take and because of the work on all sides, kids are better off. Yeah. And I strongly believe that. I also think, kind of politically, just brass tacks politics, right? A lot of the opportunities, I think, are in blue cities and red states, which means that for you to be an effective city-based advocate, you have to have relationships on the right and the left, right? Yep. Because in a blue city and red state, power is held locally by Democrats, and at the state level, Republicans. Yep. And in Indy, we're kind of unique, but I think it's replicable. the fact that the mayor's office has been the major charter school authorizer,
Yep.
and most of our mayors have been Democrat,
Yep.
has really made it okay to be a local elected official in power with a D next to your name and
Yep.
actively support charter schools. It
Yeah.
also helps that the teachers union doesn't really play in local elections here, so they're more, free to vote their conscience, where that's not the
Right.
case at the state house. But we have great close relationships on the left and the right at the Mind Trust. And I think some of that is because we try as hard as we can not to view ourselves as a member of a political party first and a charter advocate second,
Yep.
advocate for great schools first.
Yep.
And we try to ask the question, what is the political coalition to get to where we want to go?
Yep.
And we do want to be agnostic on if it's right, left, or center, because this is ultimately is about power, and it's about who holds power where. And in a blue city and a red state, it's a forcing mechanism to ensure that you've got relationships on all sides of the aisle, and that you are thinking strategically around how do you build the coalition to get you the win. And I think that's got to be separate from relationships, because if it's not, then you're going to get paralyzed, and you're going to always be scared of your own shadow, because you're going to be afraid of making somebody upset with you.
Yeah, I want to come to this question of blue-red, and to what extent what we might have learned in Indianapolis is transportable to other environments. Where is it not? Let me just make one comment about personal relationships. Ray Cortinez, former superintendent at LA Unified and kind of an ed reform hero, he became my mentor at some point, and I will do anything. I would do anything for Ray. He had done so many great things for me, and he also was appointed back into LA Unified as superintendent the same week that they announced that I had become the CEO at CCSA. So he had me up to Pasadena to his favorite restaurant, and I sat down, and we were already very friendly with each other. And I congratulated him on having been chosen to run the largest CMO in Los Angeles. And the laughter, the bellowing laughter across this restaurant, everybody turned and said, "What's going on with this guy?" But I will say, one of the hardest calls I ever made, professional calls at least, in my life, was to tell Ray that we were suing Los Angeles Unified on Prop 39. That was after years of him doing other things, especially on special ed, courageous on special ed, and all some other things like the public school choice process of 2011, really, reasonable. But on this Prop 39 piece, the district simply wasn't doing it, and that's what we had to do. And I will say it had a long-term effect on Ray's and my relationship that I still kind of regret to this day. And yet I know that's a part of what was expected of me, given that I was in that role. But conditions are different. Conditions really are different. I don't think you and I are suggesting that what's going on in Indianapolis is going to work in New York City, is going to work in Los Angeles, especially blue contexts,
Right.
Where blue cities within blue states. But there may be some things here that you do think are transportable. What would you share on that topic?
Yeah, and I've written a bit on this too. I just firmly believe, and it's not actually rocket science, that to advance charter school policy in a red state, you have to be in a broad school choice coalition. And that doesn't, mean that, charter advocates have to ascribe to, everything relative to vouchers and ESAs. It doesn't, mean that, but it does mean for you to be successful in a red state, you almost certainly have to be in coalition with the folks that have the most influence and power at the state level. And, since COVID, that politically has oftentimes been with private school choice. But it's interesting. The number of charter school policy wins the last few years has been enormous, and it's growing.
Yeah.
So I reject the notion that private school choice advancements come at the expense of charter schools. I actually don't think we have any evidence of that. I actually think it can be an accelerant if you create the right coalition and you're smart about it.
Yeah.
So I think, one thing in the red
state, that's one of Starley's refrains again and again, that you don't see this as either or, that accelerant may be the best.
And so then the question is, okay, so if you're a city-based advocate, right, who is in a deep blue context, which most of us are, how do you then influence that kind of, right of center school choice coalition that is the opposite political base, right, that you're dealing with every day in your city? And that's hard. And I think it became harder, quite frankly, in the age of Trump,
Yeah.
because you've got a lot of folks in the charter. We are very politically homogenous. We've got a lot of good Democrats who don't want to be associated with Republicans because of, what that might mean and the connections that, might be made. And I understand that. I completely understand that. But, in a blue city and a red state, that is going to be inherent in the work that we do. That is going to be there regardless. You're going to be called a shill for billionaires regardless of how hard you go for charter schools.
Yep.
You're probably going to be called a racist regardless of what policies you propose.
Mm.
So all of that stuff, in a sense, Jed, in my opinion, is kind of built in to the job. So if that's built into the job, then why not create the coalitions that are going to get you the influence that you need to advance your agenda for kids? And I think ultimately that is understandably really hard for people who live in a blue city, whose friend group, all lean one way. And then the reality is, for you to be successful at the state level, you have to create coalition with folks who might disagree with you on 95% of the issues.
Yep.
And who that association then might, feel a certain way in your social circles, et cetera. So I think it's really hard. And I don't want to say, that it's easy to overcome, but I do think there are a lot of blue cities and red states like Indianapolis and others that have shown that you can actually do both. You can have
Yep.
great local relationships with Democrats and still be a part of a school choice coalition at the State House.
So what do you have to say to people in blue cities and blue states? Is it, hey, you'd have to run a completely and utterly different strategy? Are there aspects of what you have done that you think would work? Any thoughts there?
I actually, and I don't know, maybe I'm just an optimist, but I think that there's such an opportunity right now for Democrats and charter schools. If you look at the, trends in national politics, the 2024 data, the fact that the Democrats are losing many people of color at, record speeds, the fact that they are now the party of the status quo in education, and the fact that Republicans have gone all in with private school choice. What a window of opportunity for smarter people than me in blue states to figure out how to square that, and how to make charter schools the reform, or a piece of the reform set that the Democrats re-embrace. I think that there is a political incentive for them to do it. I think that there's an incentive to distinguish themselves from Republicans and to draw the line here and not here.
Yep.
I think that there, are a lot of really smart, hungry advocates in blue states that can, make those connections for them. So I'm actually long-term really bullish on charter schools in blue states, because I think that the politics are converging in a way where it makes the incentive structure very clear. And there's a rationale now for Democrats to re-embrace charter schools more than there has been since Obama.
Yeah, so I agree with you entirely. I think that courage and political acumen really matter here, because conditions are different. You could do something that's counterproductive, but my sense is that there's an opportunity for us to drive a narrative. One of the things that drives me the most crazy about the charter school experience in a lot of cities is we might win some school board elections and then we'll essentially go quiet on policy matters. Maybe there'll be a few charters to vote on, renewals and stuff like that. Maybe one facility issue or something like that, but there really isn't that much discussion at all. During that quiet, the other side, of course, calls charter schools a billionaire plot, everything. 2 years of just charter schools are toxic. And then we go back to those same school board members and say, will you please step out and be supportive of charter schools? And they're like, are you kidding me? I love you, but I'm going to pretend that I don't. the question for me is, how do we drive a narrative between elections in those places? And that's where I think our critique really matters. And one of the things I talking to CharterFolk, a lot of them are like, please drive a better narrative, but they feel it can be done with positive stories. Maybe we do a few, publications, placements, but I just have to tell them, as heartbreakingly, difficult as it is, we're not going to drive narrative with anything other than the policy agendas we attempt to advance. Sure. And in blue context, if we really uncover the charter school recipe, it resonates deeply with blue state values.
Yes.
The question is, can we bring those things in between elections? So, I mean, I think you and I talked about this. I know we're kindred spirits on this but provide some nuance here.
Yeah. So I learned actually in a different context early in my career from a mentor that communications follows substance, and that a communications plan void of being in service to what you want to accomplish is just a waste of time. And I think a lot about all the national conferences that a lot of us go to, and all of the sessions on how can we communicate charter schools more effectively, and the amount of money spent on message testing and polls and all that stuff's important. But almost all of those conversations, in my experience, are void of the central question. What is it that we want to accomplish? And then our communication strategy ought to be in service to accomplishing the policy goals that we've established, not the other way around, right? It shouldn't be the tail wagging the dog. So I think sometimes our communication strategies, might have a lot of real data behind them. They might sound really good in, like a focus group, but what are they in service towards? Just like school board elections. What does a school board election victory mean if it doesn't translate into real policy change? So if a school board is supposed to be a reform school board and then votes on a charter school moratorium, they're not a reform school board, right? Yeah. So this is true in a lot of places, and it's not even, necessarily a critique on the organizations that are working to get people elected, but it's a mindset shift that we can't, in my mind, message our way to, a proactive win. We can't get people elected and sit on our hands for 2 years, and then ask them what they did for us.
Yeah.
We actually have to have, and I printed it out, and I know that this is going to look really corny, but you gotta start. I said that to my team yesterday, and I printed it out. But you got to start with, what's the vision? I don't care what you call it, right? So the North Star, the vision, whatever it is, there's got to be something there that is bold and that is inspiring. And then, as you said, you have to actually figure out, okay, what's the implementation plan? What's the agenda to help us effectuate the vision? Yeah. And then let's create messaging and a comms plan, and an outreach strategy around that, rather than pull test our way to a certain set of key phrases, be scared as hell to say the phrase charter school.
Yeah.
And then, message your way to nothing. So I just couldn't agree more that you got to start with substance. You got to start with vision, North Star, policy, and then let's figure out, how to develop a messaging strategy that will make it more possible to achieve our North Star.
Well, I could be wrong. There could be other North Stars that I'm just not giving enough credit to. But I do, as you know, stay on the outlook. Hey, where are they? And you guys clearly have one in Indianapolis. I think it's just astonishing. I also think that the Mind Trust has now more than a decade. I can go back through, the Indianapolis Star, and I can find you guys on A1 over and over again. And I also can see the editorials and the letters to the editor that were written thereafter almost every time that the Mind Trust was on the A1 with some bold effort to reform the school district. The response was always, how dare you? Are you kidding me? Just the fury that came against the folks. And then you look 2 years later, they are taking steps in that very direction. And this is where I think the courage thing really matters, because it's the courage to ride through the 12 to 18 months of being the anathema in town, to have the sense of confidence, though, that on the other side of that, a more receptive audience awaits us. Can you add any other, addition you would offer to what the value of a North Star would be in different places?
Yeah. So I think that's really right. And I think a lot about the concept of an Overton window, where you have to expand the universe of what people think is mainstream
Yeah.
and what people think is
Yeah.
actually
Oh, I love
possible,
that. I love that.
right? So if the suite of legislative reforms in 2025, and if our North Star of a system of autonomous schools that are held accountable, blah, 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 was, was put forth when the Mind Trust was founded in 2006, which a version of it was, honestly,
Yeah.
it would have been met with ridicule and laughs and, oh, that's cute. And then you think about the Opportunity Schools report that we put out in 2011 that is still on our website. It called for two things. It called for opportunity schools, which a few years later became innovation schools.
Sure.
And it called for the mayor to be in charge of IPS, which is now on the table as the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance manages through its work. So in 2011, that thing was political suicide. They literally had to lock the doors of the Mind Trust and leave for a couple of days when they released it because people hated it so much, right? And again, even in reform circles, oh, that's cute. Another idea by the Mind Trust, not going to happen. But you expand the Overton window, you expand what can be mainstreamed, what can be possible, and you do it over time, and then you just chunk it out, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to a point where 20, 25 years later, it might seem like a full generation, but you've collectively and methodically transformed a system. And I think that's what a North Star means to me. It's not like, here's our legislative agenda, or it's not, here's our 3-year, strat plan. It's what's our 20-year vision for what's possible for public school students in our community. And let's drive towards it year after year after year after year to expand the Overton window, to expand what's possible. And eventually you wake up and you're like, holy crap, we're getting, really close to this thing. And it turns out it's not that controversial when you get down to the impact it has on kids and families.
Yeah.
If you poll, charter schools in Indy, right, overwhelmingly positive, in particular the families that we're serving. So you also have to put into context those loud voices that called me names and put crazy things on social media are a fraction of 1% of our community, right?
Yep.
They're definitely not the parents that we're serving. So you just also got to put the noise in context. And if you have a North Star, and if you're convicted about that North Star, you just got to drive through it and just continue to make progress over time. That progress will snowball and it will result in, something really big and meaningful. But it's certainly not going to happen over a year or 2 or 3. It's going to happen over time, maybe even a generation's worth of time. And that's how systemic change happens, in my opinion. And it's how it can be sustainable as well, right? It's not one superintendent. It's not one CEO of the Mind Trust. It's not one elected official. This is a community-driven change process over years that results in something much better on the other side.
Brandon, I think this is exactly the right place to end this. You've just been so courageous over the last year. I think you're also been very helpful in the last hour to help us understand what the experience is like and encouraging us to do new things. So I just wish you well. I can't wait to see what you do next in Indianapolis. And I also can't wait to see what you do next in terms of helping other charter school advocates across the country take that unagnostic standpoint, which is likely going to put just new octane in the charter school movement for many years yet to come. So any last thoughts you want to share? Otherwise, I just want to say thank you.
No, I just really appreciate you and the work that you're doing to give a microphone to charter folk across the country. I'm not just saying this because you asked me on your podcast, but charter folk is the voice of the national charter school movement. It just is. And you giving that microphone out to leaders across the country and is, if you weren't doing it, it would not be happening. And you were one of those people that every week or so would send me a text of encouragement. And you would say, do not call me. I know that you're busy, but I just wanted to know I'm thinking about you and I'm really proud of you. And it's that it's that kind of camaraderie and community that, keeps a lot of folks going. So I just wanted to say thanks for all you do, all of the advice and counsel that you're giving to advocates across the country, and for creating space for there to be a true national charter school movement that, has a place to come and to share really bold ideas. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Brandon. You touched me with that. And as you know, we're all at each other's backs, and the courage that we bring is so important, and so many people are doing it. So thank you for being an example of it, and thank you for encouraging others to do the same.
Thanks.